Well, the UNE is preparing to honour one of its most brilliant lawyers, constitutional law expert Brian Pape, who died back in 2014. You might remember he gained notoriety when he challenged the constitutional legality of Kevin Rudd's proposed billion-dollar tax bonus payments as part of his stimulus package. Do you remember that big challenge in the High Court of Australia? Look, Brian did lose, but he was the first person to, as a self-funded academic, challenge the Commonwealth in such a fashion, and it caused a lot of attention, and a lot of questions were asked about what the federal government was doing at the time. Now, to students, he was a great inspiration, and in his honour, the School of Law has been fundraising in the hopes of securing enough money to create an annual prize in his honour. Paul Akon is from the School of Law at UNE. Good morning to you, Paul.
Good morning, Kelly.
Hi, thank you for joining us. How is Brian Pape remembered amongst his colleagues and the legal fraternity, some of the legal brains?
To sum it up, he was a character. He was very, very energetic, and he had a lot of vision. He was also instrumental, in addition to that case that you just mentioned when he took on the Commonwealth. He was also instrumental in setting up the Ag Law Centre at UNE, which is the only one of its kind in Australia. And he was also very, very involved in establishing a moot court at the law school at UNE and ensuring that it was a compulsory unit for students to pass. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners would agree that that's a good idea, that students get some education in relation to advocacy and also some live sort of assessment. So he was very, very visionary and very energetic and a real character.
We had a lot of fun with him. He was a great friend of ours, a regular on some of the sort of sessions that we would have. So we were grateful for his time always. How do students recall him? Because and his sort of students who went on to practice the law, there's a great revere for him. What do they say to you? Or you often were having coffee with him when they'd walk past too.
Exactly. I just reminded when you raised that. I was down in his chambers when he finished up at the university in 2011. He went back to the bar, and he had chambers in Macquarie Street, and we went up to have a cup of coffee in Macquarie Street, and I was just amazed that in the short time we were there, about an hour or so, having a coffee, 2 or 3 students stopped and said, "Oh, Mr. Pape, I remember. Oh, Mr. Pape, you were amazing. Preparation. I can still remember your teaching, and the impact that he had on students was very, 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 very big, to the extent that amongst the donors to our fundraiser, one of the biggest donors was an ex-student who is now practicing in Hong Kong, and he showed his generosity in he made 2 donations. So, yeah, he had a big impact. I doubt that I will ever have that sort of impact, put it that way.
Paul Akon is with us, and we're talking about the work that's been going on to create the Brian Pape Memorial Prize for Constitutional Law. The UNE has quite important, I guess, regulations around how much money you need to raise to create this kind of prize. What kind of standard did they set you?
Well, that's right. Historically, to set up a perpetual prize of this nature, you had to raise about 10 to 12,000, but with the low interest rates now, it's double that. So you have to raise between $20,000 and $25,000.
It's a pretty big effort.
And we got donations from judges across all the jurisdictions, from the High Court down, barristers, solicitors, law school colleagues, former students, as we've mentioned. That's in the legal fraternity alone, let alone, the community itself. Even his old school friends who he was brought up down in southern New South Wales, passed around the hat, and they collected a significant sum of money which they sent in, and for which we were, of course, very, very, very grateful.
Oh, how extraordinary! So you're finally able to announce that you've reached enough, and you'll actually be able to start this.
Yes, the first prize for the 2017 top constitutional law student will be awarded in March of this year, and it'll be a $500 prize, and that will be the minimum amount. Hopefully, if the fund grows, the prize will increase, but at this stage, the Office of Advancement tells us that there's enough money there for this to be a perpetual prize.
How fantastic. That's extraordinary. And how will you select the students? What kind of calibre of student will you be looking for to recognise Brian in this way?
Well, I think it's going to be pretty well mathematical, like most of these prizes are. It'll be the student that achieves the top mark, and also, is in the view of the unit coordinator, deserving of the prize, so to speak. If there's more than one, it will be shared, but generally speaking, one stands out. And I understand from the unit coordinator, having spoken to him recently, that there is somebody that he has in mind.
Oh, wow, that's exciting. That's very exciting. And any additional support for students, I'm sure they'll be very excited to see that as well.
It's a nice prize in this day and age, and I think it's a wonderful way to commemorate his legacy. I mean, UNE School of Law, UNE as a university, and the School of Law in particular, was really punching above its weight when he went down to Canberra, as you said in the introduction, as the first academic lawyer in the history of the High Court, which is over 115 years, to argue a case. So it wasn't a Sydney University academic or a ANU academic or a Melbourne University academic or a UNSW. It was a regional university academic, and that's something that nobody will ever be able to take away from him, that honour. And having impressed the court, as you said in your introduction, he did lose the case, but he started a line of cases which where the High Court has really basically said to the Commonwealth, we're going to be very carefully watching how you exercise your power and to rein them in. So
it was extraordinary. He blew the lid on that whole scenario, didn't he? Opened it up to the community's ability to question how the federal government spends its, money in that way. It was incredible.
And a lot of people misunderstood him and said, because there was bomb threats and everything when the case was it was very dramatic, down in Canberra. They had to clear the court at one stage. A lot of people thought that he was actually against the payment, but he wasn't. He was a very pure lawyer. All he was saying is, I'm not against the payment. I'm just against the manner in which the Commonwealth is doing it, and they should have done it in a constitutional manner. So he was very much a purist in that regard, and there's a lot of admiration for him in legal circles. And indeed, I learnt recently from a colleague, he's the only academic that I know that used to walk around with a constitution in his pocket. He had an Australian constitution in his pocket. And that has raised a number of eyebrows in high places from time to time, usually favourably. But, I mean, this is the sort of person he was. I mean, I just couldn't imagine walking around from day to day and having a copy of the Australian Constitution in my pocket, as much as I love teaching law. But that's the sort of fellow he was.
I have missed him so much in this constitutional debate that we've had. I have been desperate to hear what he would have made of all that we've seen in federal politics in the last 6 months. It just would have been a feast for him, I imagine, and I'm so sad that he hasn't been here to cast his brilliant mind onto what's been happening.
He was indeed, and indeed I had an email from his wife Diana recently, who said exactly that. She said he would have been up to it, in his eyeball. He would have loved what's been going on, not only here but also in the United States.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, but there were other sides to him. For instance, another colleague of mine told me that because he was a great student of military history also, and another colleague of mine said she was going to a U2 concert, and he looked at her and said, are you two? What's spy planes over Russia and Gary Powers got to do with a concert?" And she said, "No, Brian, it's a world famous rock band." And she said he just looked at her blankly as if she was from outer space. He had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. So there was we had some very funny times with Brian, and we miss him in the common room for what he was and what he said. But the main thing was that this great legacy that he's left to the School of Law in doing what he did, and he's had universal recognition from the legal fraternity about the strength of character that he had to do what he did. And so we're able to commemorate him now with this wonderful prize.
And what does it mean to you, Paul, to be able to see this come about? I know you've been working very hard personally, and you were obviously a great fan of Brian's, but to be able to see his legacy remembered in this way.
Well, we started off. You interviewed me when we started this off a couple of years ago, and it was with some trepidation because it's not easy, and there have been other campaigns for fundraising which have not been successful. But we were just amazed, in relation to the response that we got and how many people in the legal fraternity in the highest of high places recognised this and sent money to be part of this campaign, and it's been very, very satisfying, Kelly, very satisfying, and I think it's a fantastic tribute to UNE and to the School of Law that we're able to honour one of our past members of staff in this way. I think it's just been very, 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 very satisfying indeed. And as I said before, right across the community, he's also had a lot of support, financial support, which has been, in some senses, we've been surprised in where the money's come from. But a lot of people were obviously very, very strong supporters of his, and enough to write cheques and send them in. He was. There's another aspect to him too, that he was very, 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 very. How can I say it? Keen on academic rigour, and at the time, my wife was a school principal at PLC at Armidale, and he used to say to her, Deborah, used to say, "I'm going to come up there and do an audit. I'm very concerned about academic rigour up there. Those girls getting proper education. These Presbyterians, I know they're renowned for educating women, but I want to be sure." And that was the sort of, in a funny sort of way, although he was doing it in a humorous way, that was part of his academic rigour. Was very big part of his teaching. And that's why, even though he was he had a reputation for being pretty hard and tough, if you'd done the work and he could see you'd done the work, he was very, very good to students. And, they talk very highly of him.
Well, Paul,
very, very highly.
Congratulations on being able to make sure this came to fruition.
Yes.
What an incredible way to honour his legacy. So in March, we look forward to finding out who the student is. And, well done to you and the team for making it happen.
Thanks.
Thank you for talking to us.
Cheerio.
Thank you.
Vale, Brian Reginald Pape.